Welcome, this is The Geese. Today let us delve into the most relevant and crucial topic, NATO, the role and significance of it in the modern world. Time to thoroughly analyze the ins and outs and our program's guests' points of view on it. Let the discussion begin. Please welcome Henry Keane.
Hello. So for peace to finally come to Ukraine, the country at war, is it enough only to win the full-scale war instigated by Russia? No. We all want to do everything that might be necessary to make sure the aggression of Moscow is not repeated. Kiev only sees stability, peace and development by joining a strong and secure family, NATO. Ukraine, on the other hand, will obviously become a shield between the unpredictable Russian realm and the civilized European world. Today we will talk more about Ukraine's path to NATO, the strength of its army, and whether it is possible for Ukraine to join the alliance even before the war actually ends. Stay with us and find out.
Watch this.
NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was created in 1949 by 12 countries, including the United States, Great Britain, Canada, and France. Now the bloc counts in 31 countries. NATO's original goal was to block Soviet expansion in Europe after World War II. In addition, the United States saw it as a tool to prevent the revival of nationalist tendencies in Europe and promote political integration on the continent. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but anything changed in this 75 years? Soviets are expanding right now because the Kremlin's morphed. Russia is nothing but Soviets, and national tendencies in Europe are skyrocketing. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, many Eastern European countries joined the alliance. I mean Albania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, Lithuania, Latvia, Dievs Sveti Latviju. The Latvians will understand this, and Estonia. The alliance agreement contains 14 articles that all NATO members must adhere to. Most notable is Article 5, which declares that an attack on one member state is an attack on them all. And I quote, "The parties agree that an armed attack on one or more of them in Europe or North America shall be considered an attack on all of them." In applying Article 5, allies may provide any form of assistance they deem necessary to respond to the situation. This is an individual commitment of each member of the alliance. Call it a coincidence or not, but when the aggressor Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, also ISIS attacks intensified around the globe. NATO responded by the largest increase in collective defense since the Cold War. The alliance tripled the size of the bloc's response force and deployed multinational battle groups in Baltic countries and Poland. After Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in February 2022, NATO further strengthened its defense, of course. The bloc's allies have put thousands of additional force units on high alert. The total number of multinational battle groups increased to 8, effectively doubling the number of troops on the ground and expanding NATO's forward presence along the alliance's eastern flank, from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south. Although the alliance is not directly involved in the war on the side of Ukraine, NATO countries send weapons and equipment worth tens of billions of dollars. In general, all that led by the United States, the largest donor in particular. All NATO member states discuss military aid to Ukraine at monthly meetings at Ramstein in Germany. One debate now is whether NATO countries should supply F-16 fighter jets, which Ukraine says will strengthen its long-term air defense capabilities, and Ukraine also needs long-range missiles. Who is the best to answer that question if not the Ministry of Defense? Our next guest. Rasa Jukneviciene, Minister of Defense of Lithuania 2008-2012, member of European Parliament. Rasa, hello.
Hello.
First question, quite straightforward. NATO, what is it after all? What is the main purpose of the organization?
As it was when it was founded.
Yes, well, let's start there. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Now it's much more clear than it was maybe 10 years ago, when NATO was full of illusions that, and around NATO, many societies in some countries, they were discussing about the necessity of NATO, that NATO is already coming from the past, that we live in new environment, geopolitical environment, when Soviet Union collapsed. Because remember, in 1949, when NATO in April was founded, that was some kind of slogan at that time, that why they needed NATO. Americans in Europe, Americans in, Russia or Soviet Union out, and Nazi Germany down. So that was popular saying at that time. But of course, it was founded because after World War II, it was clear that Euro-Atlantic link is very important. Without Americans, of course, it would be difficult to defeat Nazis. And Europe was in ruins. Part of Europe was occupied by Stalin's Soviet Union. And Stalin was also engaged, and Soviet Union was not only in their own territory or in occupied territories, like Baltic states, like Poland, part of Germany. They were under direct influence of Moscow, Soviet Union, but also in other parts. Look to Latin America, look to some countries in Africa and elsewhere. China, Russia also was active in that region, Soviet Union. So communism was a danger for very many countries, and that's why NATO was founded first of all as defense organization. But today we see that the history is somehow back. And the same countries, maybe without official communist Bolshevism ideology, but exactly the same capitals. They are the same threat to not only neighboring countries, but also to all democracies. So NATO is more than necessary. Of course, NATO has some troubles. NATO is not proportionally have resources on the other side of Atlantic. I mean, the United States, and in European side. On European side, we have to fulfill those gaps. And now we see that Ukraine, despite that is not part of NATO, but is acting like defending NATO, even
Obviously.
defending NATO countries.
Yeah. Well. So for NATO to participate in a full-scale war, what should happen? I'm not talking about the Ukraine actually right now, but what should happen that NATO will actually step inside the conflict, step in. The NATO soldiers put their foot on the ground, and this ground is at war. What should happen?
In NATO history was only once when Article 5 was used to defend one of NATO countries, and it was 2001 when when the United States were attacked, this terror attack, and then was the only time for that, because NATO is defensive organization. NATO is an organization formed, organized, and founded to defend those countries they are members of NATO. It's for defense their territory.
Okay, I understand.
When the United States were attacked, so it means that NATO stepped in as an organization, agreed among themselves, and then this offensive project was launched, operation was launched outside NATO territory in Afghanistan. but that was for defense.
Okay, well, let me rephrase my question. I know that you come from Lithuania, of course. I was born and raised in Latvia. So we are from Baltic states. We know what it is to be in the Soviet Union, at least I remember it. But what if Russian army would go for Baltic states, would invade Lithuania, would invade Latvia? Will NATO defend its territory then?
Of course, it is without, if not, so it would be no NATO at all. And it is special articles. We have defensive plans. There are structures they are discussing, and the structure who is responsible for what. It doesn't mean that it will happen automatically.
Right.
Of course, political level have to make some decisions, to do some decisions. But on the other hand, today, I don't know details because it's not my business to know all classified details today of NATO. But it is already organized everything so that also military part of NATO has much more rights and much more ready to act if it's necessary. And this is, I'm speaking about the concrete plans for defense of our region as well. It means that if attack happens, so everybody have to know from where to where, how the speed, everything, the scale of the operation, who will be involved, what kind of military resources will be used, and so on and so on. So this is NATO is planning. Every day they are planning and organizing military exercises, how to act if it's necessary.
Do you believe if NATO accepts Ukraine right now, let's say tomorrow, do you believe this will stop Putin from doing what he's doing, from the invasions, from the further invasion?
First of all, it's not realistic to imagine that Ukraine would be invited or become member of NATO tomorrow. So it's not necessary even to speak about that. But I can say that it's unfortunately NATO countries members did a lot of mistakes before. Especially the biggest mistake was done in 2008 in Bucharest summit, NATO summit, when some countries blocked invitation for Ukraine and Georgia for membership action plan.
Absolutely.
And that was the biggest mistake. I think it was a message to Putin that it's some kind of gray zone and you can grab it. So this was the biggest mistake. And of course, I expected more in Vilnius summit. But on the other hand, today, Ukraine is at least very close to NATO membership. And today, I don't think it's not the first need to be member of NATO tomorrow. The first need is to help Ukraine to win this war, and really to win this war, to liberate the territory. And it is happening without NATO membership because all countries are doing this, helping this except that military personnel or human resources are not used.
Well, the reason I've asked, you said that there is no reason to talk about that Ukraine will be accepted in NATO while the war is on. You are absolutely right. I understand that. But the reason I asked my question is, I believe Putin is afraid of NATO, or at least he's concerned that if he touches the ground of alliance, the answer is imminent. And Russia is not ready for that. Do you believe that NATO will win in case it needs to carry out the war against Russian Federation?
I don't know if Putin today, maybe yes, but during my term as Minister of Defense, 2008-2012, I was not so sure if Putin at that time was afraid NATO. And I can tell you shortly the story why I think so.
Please do.
Just after invasion to Georgia, 2008, end of 2008, Russia started heavy militarization and reforms, especially westwards, in the western part of Russia, including Kaliningrad region, including northern part of Russia. And we followed this very carefully, our military intelligence. And at the end of my term, I had several meetings in some other countries, including the United States. And we discussed why Putin is doing this, spending so much money next to our borders, knowing that we are not a threat. I mean, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, or even Poland. We were almost naked at that time. We had no military exercises were not conducted in our territory because many countries believe that it can provoke Putin. So we were totally unready. And when we discussed with our allies, especially Americans, their answer was, evaluation was at that time that Putin is preparing himself to test NATO. At that time, 2010, Yanukovych came to power, came with, of course, Russian support. And that was like soft power or dirty power to grab Ukraine or to include Ukraine without the war into the orbit or into this empire. You remember Yanukovych refused membership in NATO.
I do,
First weeks when he went to Brussels, it was prolonged agreement on Crimea for military installations from Russian side and so on and so on. So Putin was happy, and Putin was sure that Ukraine, Belarus, all other countries will be under the control. And now for him was a plan to test NATO, and it was very easy to test it because it was, the vulnerable at that time, very vulnerable geography of Baltic countries, especially somewhere in the north of Estonia, with Russian population living there, or Suwalki corridor, as many know what does it mean today. At that time, nobody spoke about that, nobody. So that was very dangerous situation. And if not happened what happened in Ukraine 2014, I am sure this scenario would be used or could be used. So my answer to your question, if Putin is afraid NATO or not, I think that they knew very well the status quo or situation in European part of NATO at that time, that NATO was not ready. Neither we, small countries, for any attack. So today we are much more ready, and thanks Ukrainians. They saved us twice already. First 2014. And then Putin had to change his plans, and he used, I think, I say Plan B, to annex Crimea and to attack Ukraine. So this Plan A to test NATO via us was postponed. And now when Putin attacked Ukraine last year, he expected that Ukraine will collapse, and then he will stay next to our doors immediately.
So what is the biggest challenge and the biggest threat for NATO at the moment, do you think? I mean, Russia is an obvious thing, but any necessity to change from inwards, from inside? Maybe the structure should be changed.
Look, as always, life is history never ends.
That's true.
Some people in my country believed when we joined NATO in 2004, I know very many people, they believe that history is over, that now it will be so boring to live in our country. I know even can quote even one person who was friend of mine, but he was a political expert. He was saying openly, now it will be so boring to live in Lithuania. We will live like Luxembourg without any challenges, or nothing. But that was wrong, of course. So life is going forward, and NATO is a union of defense union of different countries. So threats to the United States is our threats. Threats to the Baltic countries is also threats to NATO, and all internal problems also are our common problems. We are following the election campaign in the United States with many concerns, as you do, I think. And the same is with countries like Turkey, which is a NATO member, and what's happening in Israel. Everything matters to NATO. China, look, time few years ago, NATO mentioned in official documents China as a challenge or even as a threat for NATO. So look what's going on in that region. Some countries, democracies like Australia, New Zealand, other countries, they also united into one union, very similar maybe as NATO is. And Japan, South Korea, despite their tensions in the past, today they are more close to each other. So NATO is for the territory of those, to defend these territories where NATO countries are. But also partnership is with other democracies very important, because this war we are challenging now, not only in Ukraine, against Ukraine, but also Israel has now. It's the same roots. The autocracies are attacking democracy. So NATO is challenging the same problems.
Rasa, do you think that autocracies and dictatorships are finally outdated, or they will continue to be forever?
I already answered your question. History never ends.
History never ends, right? But it changes.
And look to our textbooks. Look to our history textbooks. If you will calculate the main dates pupils have to learn during history lessons, it's about the wars.
I read you.
It's almost all the time about the wars.
It is.
So Europe lived without the war because we have this European Union, and after the World War II, European Union fathers realized that it's better to cooperate than fight, and few generations were raised up during until now in safety, in peace. Many people were challenged, and they were so frightened what's happening in Ukraine, because they never expected that so large-scale war can happen in European continent. Nobody believed that. And now, of course, we don't know what will happen in nearest future. And those autocracies democracies are not majority globally.
That is true.
Not majority when we look into different countries.
Well, maybe this is the reason for the part of the world that continues to call itself free, democratic, and somewhat civilized, to finally stand for its right, not just to express the deepest concerns, as the United Nations Security Council likes to do very much, but finally to really stand for rights and for freedom as Ukrainians. Maybe Ukraine is the example for the rest of the free and civilized world.
Yeah.
Rasa, thank you so very much.
Ukraine did a lot, really. Slava Ukraine. You made a really choice for very many people to understand that history never ends, and we have to be ready.
Thank you so very much, Rasa, for your time. It was a great conversation. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good luck, Slava Ukraine.
Watch this.
Let us talk over the shoulder, see what history is teaching us. And if we look over the shoulder a bit, we see that joining NATO has been a cherry on the top for Ukraine's foreign policy for many years. A main goal and most significant parts of its plan to secure its European and Western future. Ukraine declared its desire to become part of the North Atlantic Alliance back in 2008. All the time, NATO also declared that Ukraine would eventually become a member. Relations between Ukraine and NATO began almost immediately after gaining Ukraine independence. In 1992, President Leonid Kravchuk visited the headquarters of the alliance in Brussels, and in 1994, Ukraine was the first among the post-Soviet states to conclude an agreement with NATO within the framework of the Partnership for Peace initiative. Next, during the presidency of Leonid Kuchma, there were various alliance cooperation programs in the air. At the beginning of the second wave of NATO expansion to the east in 2004, Ukraine adopted a strategy that rejected its previous policy of not joining NATO. In fact, it was then that the Ukrainian authorities announced their intention to become a full member of the alliance. For the first time, it has been said loud and clear. The third president of Ukraine, Viktor Yushchenko, declared joining NATO as the country's main goal, and attempts to apply for Road map to NATO. The road began. However, the government that came after Yushchenko blocked the whole thing. Ukraine once again is left in an immediate proximity to NATO's doorstep, and again does not make it in. In 2014, the new president was elected on the Revolution Maidan wave, Petro Poroshenko, who once again put Ukraine back on the track to NATO. Again, Poroshenko cancels Ukraine non-alignment status. Again, all the Ukrainian authorities spoke out in unison: the future of Ukraine is within the European and NATO communities. Poroshenko's successor, current president Volodymyr Zelensky, continued, and I would say very persistently, the same policy. And with the beginning of a full-scale war, Zelensky calls on the West to accept Ukraine into the alliance under an accelerated procedure without any roads and MAPs. In September 2022, the President, the Speaker of the Parliament, and the Prime Minister of Ukraine signed the relevant application.
Де-факто ми вже пройшли свій шлях в НАТО.
De facto, we have already made our way to NATO. De facto, we have already proven compatibility with alliance standards. They are real for Ukraine, real on the battlefield and in all aspects of our interaction. We trust each other, we help each other, and we protect each other. This is the alliance, de facto. Today, Ukraine is applying to make it de jure, in a process that is consistent with our value in protecting our entire community, in an expedited manner. We are taking our decisive step by signing Ukraine application for accelerated accession to NATO.
Як цьогоріч Фінляндія і Швеція розпочали приєднання.
NATO's so-called open door policy, as stated in the Alliance Article number 10, allows any European country that can strengthen and contribute to the security of the North Atlantic region to join the party. To the Kremlin, the idea of Ukraine joining NATO was a red line, or better said, red flag, or even better said, red rag to the Russian bully. Moscow claims that it was the alleged expansion of the alliance to the east that caused the war to begin, which in a Russian style is just another lie. Kiev actually submitted an application after the beginning of the Russian invasion. The Kremlin just needed a pretext, that's all. Russian President Vladimir Putin and his massive propaganda created a fake domestic Russian realm, spreading the narrative NATO is approaching Russian borders, claiming that Ukraine's accession to the alliance somehow threatens the Russians. Well, I hate to break it to Russians and some of my Western audiences like that, but even without Ukraine, NATO was so capable of militarily reaching any parts of Russia, if necessary, that if Russian society for some reason would have decided to wake up from its political lethargy, it would mean a danger for Putin's absolute Tsaric power. He couldn't afford that, of course, so Putin wanted no friends on the international arena to make an alliance with. He needed an enemy to disguise from its nation how naked actually its king is. Who cares that Russia and the North Atlantic Alliance have long had common borders with or without Ukraine in the alliance, in particular with Norway, the Baltic countries, and the USA, I mean Alaska. Therefore, NATO did not pose any threat to Russia at that time. However, thank Russian version of God, Russians don't care about facts. They just cherish their Russian greatness. Driving German cars, using American iPhones, wearing Italian clothes, drinking French wine, having their money well hidden in European and American banks. And it is exactly that, negligence to the bare facts, that makes Russia dangerous to the civilized world. Military conflicts in Transnistria, Abkhazia and South Ossetia increasingly proved that. And so, in order not to be left alone against the Soviets, Russian threat, Ukraine seeks membership in a secure and safe alliance of NATO. Again. Well, despite all the history, the facts, and all that have been said and done by Ukraine, there are many voices still heard doubting Ukraine's accession prospects. Kyiv expected to get the long-awaited invitation to join at the last NATO summit that was held in July this year in Vilnius. Zelensky came there personally. In the final document of the meeting of the leaders of the alliance countries, it was stated that Ukraine no longer needs any road plans or maps for membership in order to join the alliance. The country's progress will be evaluated within the framework of an annual national program that was adapted. However, the communiqué did not say nothing, an invitation into the alliance. I was sure that it was a happy day for Kremlin, or underneath the Kremlin, considering Putin's love to bunkers. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg believes that Ukraine's victory should be a precondition for the start of negotiations on Ukraine's membership in NATO.
If Ukraine does not prevail as an independent sovereign state, then of course the membership issue is not at the table at all, because then we have no candidate member anymore in Ukraine. So whatever you think about when Ukraine can become a member, a precondition for that issue to be at the table at all is that Ukraine prevails, and we are helping Ukraine to do so.
Stoltenberg said this a year ago, and he repeated it now. He emphasized that the very fact that the active phase of the war continues does not allow Ukraine to join the alliance. So now Ukraine is actively working to get more clear and promising instructions manuals, if you like, for accession to the alliance at the next summit of the bloc. It will take place in July next year in Washington, D.C. As the Deputy Prime Minister of European and Euro-Atlantic Integration, Olga Stefanishyna, explains, now, first of all, it is necessary to start full-fledged work of the Ukraine NATO Council. The second thing that Kyiv is working on is a roadmap of interoperability with NATO, which will become the basis for Ukraine's future membership in the alliance, the Deputy Prime Minister emphasized. Stefanishyna and other members of the Ukrainian government have repeatedly emphasized that Ukraine will not trade its lands for a seat in NATO. There will be no territorial concessions. You know, in more than 1.5 years of full-scale and devastating warfare on Ukrainian land, the Ukrainian army could have become almost the most powerful army of the alliance with, a real combat experience. First, this. And secondly, Ukrainian soldiers learned how to use a variety of weapons in ways that Western engineers have not even dreamt of. And the Ukrainian army is now quite a numerous force and very, very motivated. Maybe now, finally, is the time to open the door of the alliance to someone who is, even though spilling their own blood, is politely knocking for years until someone else's tanks break in. Just asking. I am so very happy to give you our guest, a member of Ukrainian Parliament, Chairman of the Permanent Delegation of Ukraine in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. Yehor Chenriev is with us in our studio tonight.
Watch this.
I will put a statement and you will try to continue it.
Okay.
All right? Ukraine will be in NATO already if?
Not if, when. When, I think it's when. When we win this war, when we will have victory, and I have no doubt that Ukraine will become a member state in NATO. So our condition, it's actually to win this war and to continue our reforms.
So any chance Ukraine enters NATO before the hostilities end, before the war? Do you believe? Is it legally?
Probably. It could be some option if NATO will be ready to be involved in this war by their own armies. Because we understand that NATO has their fifth article about in their Washington Treaty
Right.
about actually if one country was under attack, all countries, it means that all countries are under attack. So that's why I don't think that our partners are ready to start the war even on the territory of Ukraine by their own armies. Another option that sometimes some speakers publicly say about maybe you have to consider the partial membership in NATO of Ukraine, so just those controlled by Ukrainian government territories can be a member state, and other one will join us when they will be liberated. It's not an option for us, so we don't consider this kind of offers. But I cannot say that this is offers.
Right.
It's just rumors or just some. It's not an official offer to us from NATO or from countries, but it's also not an option for us because we have our united country, and Kherson, Zaporizhia, Lugansk, Donetsk regions, Crimea, it's also Ukraine.
It's sovereignty of the country. This is
so
the question
and
of
we are
sovereignty.
fighting for this actually.
Ukraine, when in NATO, will probably change the structure of the organization, would probably make an amendments to some procedures. How do you think the membership of Ukraine will change NATO?
Definitely, Ukraine will influence on the structure inside of NATO. Definitely, we can strengthen NATO and actually our partners understand it. We can share our
Expertise.
unique,
Expertise.
actually unique
experience.
Experience, yeah, thank you. A unique experience because any other army in Europe
Just doesn't
haven't
have the-
faced
Exactly.
with those or haven't been in this in those circumstances as we, and haven't faced that with the so strong army like Russia.
True.
And we not only resist, but we also liberate our territories and defeat Russia in different regions. So we can share this experience. We can not only on the battlefield, but also in cyber, for example, sphere,
Of
because Ukraine were and still under attack of Russian hackers, and we managed to resist of these attacks and solve these problems, and can share also this experience. So I think the architecture of it should be new architecture of the security and defense sphere of Euro-Atlantic community.
Region and community.
And I think, first of all, it's our experience. The second, I think the war in Ukraine forced to revise the doctrines, the defense doctrines of these countries, because before 24th of February, I think the main weapon or the main tool as our countries consider for deterrence of other aggressive countries or for the defense, it was missile program. But we understand, unfortunately, it's not enough just have long-range missiles. It's not enough to stop so cruel and aggressive neighbor as Russia Federation. And they revised their program of and doctrine of defense, and they started new production of armed vehicles, for example, or tanks, for example. So I think this war has changed a lot of things in perception of modern war.
Indeed, indeed it did. But I mean, do you really believe what Putin says, that NATO is expanding and Ukraine should not be in NATO? Why he's so afraid of that idea? Or he may be just using it as a pretext for his imperial ambitions and to do that, and he just doesn't care? Or he really thinks that Ukraine should not be in NATO for some...
It's not about our membership in NATO. It was like so-called reason for the start of this war, but it wasn't the real reason. The real reason is imperial ambitions, just to have Ukraine under the control of Russia, under an influence of Russia, and not only Ukraine. We can remember that in December 2021, it was statement, or even not ultimatum from Russia, from Kremlin, to the NATO that you should push out all the weapons that you have on your eastern border in the countries of Warsaw treatment, which were in the Warsaw treatment. So your borders, NATO, your borders, you should be on the borders of 1997. That's all. And it was ultimatum, or we will start war, or we will do something. So I think Kremlin want to spread their influence not only for Ukraine, but also for Baltic states, for Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, another one.
Are you telling me that the imperial ambitions of Putin is actually to create again the Soviet Union?
Not only the Soviet Union, but also with the influence on the countries of Eastern Europe.
Okay, well, let's speculate on this matter a little bit more, if you don't mind. So what's next? Okay, if he gets what he wants, Ukraine, Baltic states, what then?
So Russia, Kremlin, Putin want to revise the world order. So they think that this world order, it's not
acceptable?
Not acceptable, not good for them, actually, because
obviously.
because this world order is based on the rules. Based on
that's not good for Russia.
It's not about Russia, actually. So the violation of the rules, it's actually the character of Russia, and they try to revise this world order just to spread their influence here in Europe. Maybe it was one of the steps in a long game with other countries and with other dictators.
So you think that there was a plan, some sort of a negotiations between?
It looks like.
Right.
It looks like, because I think, and that's why the war in Ukraine and the results of this war of Ukraine is on the, at the high price. The results of it, of this, not only for Ukraine, and our partners understand that it can lead to the revise of the borders of other countries in different part of our world, by force, I mean.
Yeah, right.
So, too much on the stack, so that's why Western world helps us.
Right.
To and support us in this war.
Thank you for your answer. What major steps, if you can give me 3 major steps that Ukraine has already taken for NATO to accept Ukraine into its family?
Well, we first of all have shown our partners that we have strong army I think, the strongest in Europe army we have in Ukraine. And we can not only stop and resist of Russian army, but also defeat it and liberate our territories. So it will be win-win situation when Ukraine will become a member of NATO.
Right.
Another thing, despite the war, we continue our reforms. Step by step, we continue our reforms. And actually, yesterday, we got the first step in our accession to the EU. And actually, making these reforms and becoming closer to EU, we also become closer to NATO, because NATO and EU has the same standards of democracy, of freedom of speech, freedom of all freedoms, yeah. And of course, we have to pay attention when we are talking about the NATO, to pay attention on the defense and security sphere and reforms in this sphere. And that's why we're asking for our partners for some concrete list of these reforms that should be signed for both sides, Ukraine and NATO, that, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what you should do to become a member. We understand this.
A roadmap.
Yeah, roadmap, but not the MAP, membership action plan.
Yeah. That was my idea.
So yes, and despite the war, we continue these reforms, and the success in this process already mentioned by our partners, and I think it's a good steps on the way on our future membership in NATO.
Tell me, if Putin dies tomorrow, would it change a thing?
I hope so, but well, I hope so that he will die tomorrow, and I hope so that it will change something. But it will depend on who will become the successor of it, who will be the next president. Because, you know, my own, my personal opinion that, unfortunately, it doesn't matter what person will become a president of Russian Federation. He will be forced to be like a policeman for the whole country, and to build police state, because of so many nations, so many religions in this country. Without the so-called strong power, strong arm, I think Russia will collapse, because it's artificial structure. Yeah. So, or you will be a Democrat on the presidential position, and you will lose Chechnya, Tatarstan, other countries, and it's good for us, actually.
Yes, that's what that was reading my mind.
Yeah, or you should be the next dictator and build a police state. Unfortunately, Russia doesn't have another way of democracy. So I hope that, and for us and for Europe, I think the collapse of Russian Federation will lead for a sustainable peace in Euro-Atlantic sphere.
Let's hope for that. Do you expect for Kyiv to finally get an invitation in Washington next year? I mean, to NATO. Do you think this is going to happen?
I hope so, because we are talking about the political invitation.
Right, sure.
Yeah, we understand that before the victory of Ukraine, it's this process of the accession will not start. But politically, just giving the sign to Ukraine that you will become a member state.
Finally.
Finally, yes. I think it will be a good option for us.
Okay.
I hope so that we will get some strong words in the final communique.
At least said loud and clear, finally, because it is not the first time that Ukraine attempts coming very close to a doorstep of NATO and just left behind it. And I really want to hear these words just as well, loud and clear, just to hear them.
Let's open these doors finally.
Finally, yeah, until someone enters on a Russian tank.
Yeah.
All right, so, but NATO is expanding right now.
Yep.
New members. How do you think Kremlin is reacting on that?
Well, we see this reaction. There's no reaction.
Exactly. This was
this is no reaction. This is ridiculous because, this is, it shows real reasons of this war for the whole world. It wasn't the reason that we started this war because Ukraine was so close to the membership in NATO, right. So we just prevent this with this process. They don't care about it. Their border with NATO enlarged in 1,200 kilometers with Finland. So what was the strategy?
Yeah, no
what
strategy.
Was the strategy?
Yeah.
So really, and they don't care about it. And but I think that, of course, the war in Ukraine help Finland and Sweden become a member state. Without this war, I think the reaction of Russia will be much more aggressive. Yeah, even before this decision, I think that they would try to stop this accession and to stop this.
Absolutely, I have no doubt in that. If tomorrow Russia attacks NATO country, for example, my native Latvia, Baltic states, do you think NATO will defend its territory?
Well, I think yes. Because of two reasons. First of all, Stoltenberg said that we will protect every inch of the NATO territory. The second, if they will not react, it will mean that there are no NATO. There are no Washington Treaty. There are no alliance of countries. So I think they will react. But the problem is that how Russia will invade in some Baltic states. And we discussed it.
What do you mean?
We discussed it. I just came back a week ago from the US and we had some conversation with congressmen from both parties. And I said, look, do you really think that Russia will start their invasion by their regular army? I think, look at Israel. I think they will use the same tactic of terroristic groups.
Right, third force.
With false flag, or without flags actually. Wagner Group, or Green Man like it was in Crimea in 2014, or some other one. And you will not even understand how to react to this. You will not use missiles to hit some Moscow infrastructure or military infrastructure, because it's like not a Moscow. It's some kind of persons.
Okay.
So you should have a plan how you will react on this.
And what was the answer?
They are working on this.
Okay, because actually that was my question. Of course, Moscow will not invade on Russian tanks with the Russian flags. They will send green men or whatever you be, green soldiers or any other aggressive third force. Then what? Then NATO will just express, deepest concerns, as usually United Nations Security Council does, and What happens then? Because other dictators are watching closely just as well what is going on in Ukraine.
And actually, that's why I was talking about support of Ukraine, because the NATO best investment in their own security, it's investment in our army now, just to help us to destroy all the troops of Russia here in Ukraine, because otherwise they will have it on their territories, and armies of NATO will be forced to start this war on the ground.
The cooperation with producers, with military producers, military equipment, you name it, I don't know, I'm not talking about F-16s or tanks, but some small arms. In Ukraine, is that possible? The joint stock ventures is already happening, or this is just talks in the corridors of power?
No, we're working with our partners and with companies from around the world. It's not a simple question.
I believe it is not.
Because of different reasons, not only with reason of protection of this or security of these joint ventures, but also it's question of, unfortunately, a question of bureaucracy, for example, et cetera, et cetera. But and actually, it was one of the messages from our side, from the side of our delegation to the US, that we want to be more or less dependent on your support, and let's start some new production in Ukraine. We have some, when we increased actually our production of shells, for example, 20 times from the last, but it's not last year, but it's not enough yet, because we have so high intensity of this war on the battlefield, on the front line. We need thousands and thousands shells every day. And we cannot, unfortunately, cover by our production all this need. That's why we still need the support of our partners. But it's not only about the shells. Yeah, we need some new technologies just to produce here, for example, some air defense systems or missiles for these air defense systems. That's why we are asking
in Ukraine.
Yes, that's why we are asking for this help, to cooperate with the NATO companies, the NATO states companies in Ukraine, and produce it in Ukraine.
I have a personal interest. I have a personal question, not a personal question to you as a person, but as a politician involved in NATO things. Do you remember that there was in history a way or a chance that Russia has cooperated with the treaty, with the organization, in some way, in any good way? Or it was always the problem, it was always the enemy and the enemy like positions?
You know, in 90s, I think it seemed that Russia can be a reliable partner for NATO. And even in 1997, it was established a council, a Russia-NATO Council, which we have just since this year. Because NATO believed that Russia can be a partner. But unfortunately, they were wrong. And actually, if we look at the history of Russia, you will find just a short period of democratic regime in this country, just 90s. The several centuries, they were autocratic or dictatorship. And unfortunately, for us, it's not a surprise that Russia is a dictatorship and aggressive neighbor. And that's what we want to explain our partners, that there are no other way to establish a sustainable peace in Europe just to give a membership to Ukraine, because if we will have gray zones in Europe, it always be a target for Russia, because this is their behavior, this is their nature, and unfortunately, we have to live with this aggressive neighbor.
I wish you all the luck in the world. I think you're doing a very good job, a very hard one, and all the hardships will, in the end, I believe, result in the obvious, what the world needs and what Ukraine needs, a membership in NATO. Thank you so very much for your time and for your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
The pleasure was all mine. Despite all the ups and downs, Ukraine is obviously on its heavy and long-deserved way to peace, stability and prosperity. I believe we all in Europe see that only together can the European family find a reliable protection against common enemies, whoever they are.